You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org.
Reporting and supporting what matters. This is CT Examiner Weekly.
Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutional right to citizenship for anyone born on American soil. That hardly ends the hot, often partisan debate about immigration. I'm reporter Charlotte Harvey with that story.
Connecticut has a part-time General Assembly, and most lawmakers work. But when one top Democrat helped craft regulation affecting his employer, one of the state's largest marijuana growers, critics called foul. Are they right? I'm reporter Luke Feeney with that story.
A video showing the death of J. Allen Jones was released after an 8-year legal battle. I'm reporter Ally LeMaster, and I'll have the latest on why it took so long and what we learned from the 52 minutes of footage.
From protest art to picnics to small batch bourbon, I'm Robin Breeding with events coming up.
And I'm CT Examiner Editor-in-Chief Greg Stroud, and joining me today in the studio is Associate Editor Liana Teixeira for our weekly roundup of the news. Welcome everyone to the roundtable. Liana, I think you'd agree that if ever there was a week of big stories and big questions, it was this one. But maybe you and our reporters can help us understand why these stories matter and what they mean on the state and local level. Charlotte, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit about this recent Supreme Court decision and why it matters.
So the decision in this case, Trump v. Barbara, really reaffirmed the idea that if you are born in this country, you are a citizen of this country.
So what's the controversy? Why would the Trump administration question that constitutional right?
The Trump administration really questioned that constitutional right based on the idea of the citizenship of the parents that have these children when they come to the United States and are only temporary visitors or don't have a legal status here.
So this constitutional right, it dates back to 1868, post-Civil War, giving or maybe not giving, but affirming the citizenship of formerly enslaved people living in the United States. So why question it 160 years later?
So the argument of the Trump administration in their oral arguments was really that immigration wasn't as much of a problem in the times when the Civil Rights Act of 1866 were passed and the 14th Amendment were ratified. You know, at that time, people who were pregnant had to cross an entire ocean by boat, and it just wasn't as convenient as it is today. There's just so much more of a problem of immigration than there was at that time.
When I grew up, certainly 50 years ago, when we were celebrating the bicentennial, a lot of it was about, you know, the mixing pot and people coming to America and the Statue of Liberty and bringing me you're poor and you're tired and you're hungry. And so what's changed?
What's changed, I think, really is the rethinking of what a country is, as far as, you know, citizens make up a country, but what is citizenship? And if you don't answer that question definitively, then you can't answer the question of what your country is. And I think there's just a questioning now of how we define citizenship and who should qualify as a citizen.
Now, for the state of Connecticut specifically, can you talk a little bit about what our involvement was and the Attorney General?
So our involvement was that initially Attorney General Tong, Connecticut Attorney General Tong, had joined a coalition of Democratic state attorney generals to fight against the executive order that put an end to birthright citizenship. Eventually, the case that went to the Supreme Court was Trump v. Barbara, which wasn't the case that they were fighting, but they wrote an amicus brief that really helped support the argument that was put forth to fight against it.
Just to clarify, could you just explain really quickly what an amicus brief is?
Sorry. An amicus brief is something known as the friend of the court brief. And it basically is a brief from someone outside of the court, not one of the parties, that is writing in support of one of the party's arguments.
So is this in 1868, we're dealing with the Civil War. And part of the issue of the Civil War, as we know, the two-thirds compromise, it dealt with the power, it dealt with voting. It dealt with the relative power of the North and the South at a time when it wasn't just slavery, but it was also issues of trade. And the fact that the rural South tended to have wanted protectionism for their trade, and the North tended to want open borders. So is this the same old fight? Are we hearing the same things about tariffs, about the power of the vote, and the fear that if we change the law one way or the other, it will tip the balance of power?
There is a conversation that really has to do with how the polity is made up and the voting power of people, and the concern that if you are taking in more people and adding more people to the polity that don't have a really strong background and allegiance to the country, that it could shift things in a direction that isn't really intended.
But it's sort of interesting because, we sometimes think that certain people will vote certain ways, whether it's right or left. And it seems to me that, again, we can't really guarantee, like, if there are too many people immigrating from one country versus another, how that's really going to swing the vote one direction or another. I think it's a pretty complicated issue.
And that has become a common talking point we've seen in recent years to sort of stoke anti-immigrant fears, which is these immigrants are going to come in and they're going to vote for this party or this thing.
This is this sort of conspiracy theory about sort of the replacement.
Yeah,
I
the
think
great replacement
the
theory.
great replacement. But what's interesting is in the last election, what we saw the Trump administration actually did pretty well among Latino voters in striking gains actually over previous Republicans who had been sort of more supportive of immigration.
And Charlotte, just wondering, this decision, it says it was 6-3, but we were talking earlier, it really kind of became like a 5-4 decision. Did Tong and any of the other attorney generals at the press conference you attended mention anything about actually wanting reform to the court, or were they just more focused on the decision itself?
They were more focused on the decision, but it actually didn't go as deep as you might think as far as what the decision said and what the judges said. The decision was only released a little bit earlier. They really just took what the end result was in affirming citizenship and didn't even really talk about the arguments that made up that outcome.
So Connecticut recently passed a law that dealt with making it harder for ICE agents to operate in the state. And now this birthright ruling comes out. Connecticut's really putting itself at the forefront of the immigration debate in general. What do you think is next for the state and the Attorney General in that regard?
Well, one of the issues that's coming up that has really come to the forefront in really recent times is the efforts of the federal government to denaturalize citizens that were allegedly dishonest during their naturalization process. There are 2 Connecticut residents that the federal government is specifically targeting in this instance. And when asked about this, the Attorney General said that he was going to fight and do whatever he could to try to keep the rights of immigrants solidly in place.
So this is a case where it is possible still to lose your citizenship if, for example, you lied during your naturalization process. So in this case, there's a case of 2 people, one who's accused of the sexual abuse of a child, I believe, and that they might have their citizenship stripped. It's certainly a case that it makes a favorable point for the Trump administration that there are some bad people that are becoming citizens, but this doesn't really affect that, however.
Well, one of the things that I think is really important to remember in this is these are only cases. They're only concerned with cases that happened before naturalization, before citizenship was granted. After you become a citizen, then you can't have your citizenship revoked because of crimes you commit afterwards. So it's really because these cases happened during the naturalization process and that they were allegedly dishonest to the naturalization officers that they can have their citizenship stripped. I just want to say for the record that it's really rare for people to have their citizenship revoked. It's only happened a couple times in the nation in the past decade or so.
Well, if we have fewer people immigrating to America, and America is an aging country that is having fewer and fewer births, where do the people come from to milk the cows, to farm the fields, to work at the McDonald's, or to work in high tech? And if Americans aren't going to produce children in the numbers to replace them, who will? And I think that's certainly something that we'll be talking about more, is just demographics, which are a huge part of this state and an aging state. Connecticut, sometimes I think of that. Connecticut, I think of it as Florida North. And so, but maybe on that theme, Luke, your story is a bit of a civics lesson. And I think a lot of people they question the sort of ethics or the idea that legislators and lawmakers might work at Eversource or at UI or at for a giant marijuana retailer. And so what's the big deal about a deputy speaker working on a bill regulating marijuana?
So the argument given to me by the critic of Candelaria, Lou Rinaldi, was that you can't really vote on something that you stand to materially gain from. Candelaria is someone who has been not only involved in cannabis policy this legislative session, but he was one of the key architects of the initial 2021 bill that legalized cannabis statewide. So the idea that you are working for a company that you are regulating, I understand how that may seem a little sketchy.
So what was Candelaria's response?
Candelaria vehemently pushed back. And while he did concede that there may be the appearance, that was really all he was willing to concede. He said what he did. He said he consulted staff attorneys before he voted on both two separate bills involving cannabis this legislative session. The first one was a wide-ranging appropriations bill that shifted the tax on cannabis from a potency-based tax to a flat 10.75% tax. He told me that aside from voting it, he had nothing to do with that bill.
Now, I have to say, to be fair, I called up a Connecticut lawmaker, a Republican, who would be a critic, you would think, and I asked him about this, and he said, we have to have jobs. And I can't recall anyone ever filing an ethics complaint against a lawmaker for their outside work. And he thought that was pretty remarkable as well. Wasn't exactly defending it, but we have this idea of a part-time legislature.
And Candelaria and I spoke about that, and I asked him straight up. I said, how much roughly are you guys making a year? And the number he gave me was anywhere between $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And simply put, that's not enough to support a family in this state, like many legislators have. So I do understand why there is a need for more income, but I do also understand why some people might think this doesn't look, 100% ethical.
It does raise the question, too, of why lawmakers choose to get involved in certain industries that they know they can influence potentially in the state legislature.
And Candelaria gave me that exact example. He pointed out how there were, teachers on the education committee, attorneys who sit on the judiciary committee. Rinaldi kind of rejected that comparison because he said cannabis is a much more closely regulated industry than either of those two. But that was a point he brought up as well.
So would we be better off simply having a full-time legislature paid a full salary, and then we banned this kind of thing?
I mean, I think maybe yes. I mean, this is not just a problem unique to Connecticut. Even at the federal level, you've heard representatives complain about being underpaid. And I do think part of the reason why there is so much money in politics is there can be a level of desperation. You need to pay the bills and keep the lights going. And as great as civic service is, if that's not enough to feed your family, I understand looking for other means.
Allie, so you've been actually part of the reason this came up is you have requested, you filed a Freedom of Information request for these ethics reports, right? So what
Yeah.
is a legislature? How does that work?
So I requested the statements of financial interest from everyone who's required to file them, which includes legislators, the attorney general, the governor, that sort of thing. And it'll disclose where people make their money, where they have enough money invested in stocks, and what properties they own.
So did those filings, did they tell us anything unexpected?
I mean, yeah, you got an interesting sort of mix of things. You saw where people work, where there might be conflicts of interest in that regard, and you saw maybe some legislators buy a lot of properties in the past year. If you look at prior ones, so I think it's interesting.
Is there any sense of how much outside money is being made where?
So that's interesting. So they don't have to file how much money that they make with the state. It kind of is just, what businesses are you associated with? Where do you make your money? And you have to report stocks. I believe it's if you invested over $5,000 in something, but you still don't get like a full sort of picture of how much they have invested in the stock market or a particular company.
And I think it's worth adding for the record that Candelaria did disclose that job on his most recent SFI. So that job is there.
And it's any job, in fact, that you earn over $1,000, I believe, a year is the limit. So there's a sense of it has to be a significant source of income. But is there something good about having legislators out there with actual jobs? That, a lot of legislators work as real estate agents. They work as accountants. They work as, regular. They deal with, you see top Democrats in the legislature. You go to a school board meeting and there they are. Working as the lawyer for a town. Is there something good about that, to have a sort of citizen legislators, if you will?
Well, it certainly fights back against the criticism that politicians are out of touch with the everyday person if they are doing everyday jobs.
So, and the problem is, if you're in touch, then sometimes you have conflicts of interest.
What's interesting is looking at some of the SFIs. There are, even though it's a part-time legislator and they make legislature and they make like 40,000 ish a year, there are still some state legislators that don't work besides that. So I think that was interesting to kind of see.
SFI,
statements of financial interest.
So, I mean, the reality is, would you prefer laws about marijuana to be made by people that know nothing about marijuana, and then who then controls it? Then it's the lobbyists, right? It's the special interest groups. It's the people that aren't elected at all in the background who are deciding what should or should not be voted on. So it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, I'd say.
Part of the reason why moneyed interests are able to get into the ears of elected officials, aside from the fact that they have the money to do so, is they have the will. And I think, yes, I understand some of the conflicts that can be presented with a full-time legislator, but I also think in general, regular citizens just need to increase their civic engagement a little more. We've seen it decline over the years. And I think if you have a population or an electorate that's not really engaging with government, that doesn't matter if it's full or part-time, it's going to allow these conflicts of interest to keep happening.
So Allie, on that note, to get these filings, you actually had to, they're not online, right? No. They're not posted online. You had to file a Freedom of Information request.
Yes.
And so they're still not online. So one of the things I know we've talked about is taking these filings and creating a database so that anyone online can go to CT Examiner and they can see, potentially look up a conflict of interest. I know this was an issue in a zoning rewrite in Essex, where people said, wait, the first select person there, Norm Needleman, owns quite a bit of property in the town. Is that a conflict of interest or is that not? This would at least give people an ability to see some of the financial interests that these legislators have.
And I think it gives people the option to make their own determination over what they think is a conflict of interest or something they seem somewhat alarming or that they don't like.
So Ally, I think the natural transition then is another Freedom of Information request. You've been fighting for pretty much most of the time you've been with CT Examiner to get a 52-minute video, a prison surveillance video of the death of J. Allen Jones. So you've seen the video, you've fought in the Freedom of Information Commission, we've had a lawyer, you've been in court to fight over this as well. What's the value of getting that video? Did you learn something? Was it worth the fight?
I think it is worth it. I think that this video gives an insight into an institution that is private, that no one sees, that the Department of Correction has often stated that we don't release video, that's not our past precedent to do. And we see the video, and we see the video of an inmate being killed by correction staff and medical staff who are observing him in a strip search.
What'd you make of the video?
It's a heartbreaking video. You see the death of the slow death of an individual, a person who is unconscious for over 7 minutes.
Frankly, it appeared that his last conscious or semi-conscious act was reaching out to hold the hand of one of the prison guards who was killing him.
Just out of curiosity, what was the argument that was being made against the release?
So over and over again, the Department of Corrections said that there's safety and security concerns pertaining to the video, that there's, security cameras, placements of metal detectors, sort of I think they even argued that some of the techniques they used to subdue inmates were secretive and could potentially harm officers, and potentially learning part of the layout of the prison could lead to a prison escape. They have said this during a court hearing on the matter in the wrongful death lawsuit, and they repeated the exact same argument during a Freedom of Information Commission hearing. I've heard from a lot of people that are very confused what safety and security concerns there were.
You just couldn't really see anything.
I couldn't really see anything.
So
yeah.
we saw what was blurred out, and it was maybe a label on a door.
And there was redactions made to, maybe walkie-talkie communication between inmates. Some people that were not named in the lawsuit, their faces were blurred. Some locations of security cameras, but besides that, it didn't seem to be very apparent.
Ally, the video is just so hard to watch. And my first question, and I'm wondering if you encountered this in your fight or your reporting at all, is, are there similar cases out there that we just don't know about because we haven't seen the video?
Yes, there's unfortunately quite a few cases. There was a 2019 Department of Correction death. His name was Robbie Talbot. A lot of time these videos, the public becomes aware of these videos after the family files a wrongful death lawsuit with the state. And in a lot of situations where there is a civil case involved, part of the settlement will be a sealing of the video, or the video won't be released. And in this case, you had the family and attorneys and advocates really fighting for the release of this video.
Does this need to happen every single time? Is it going to take 8 years to get what is supposed to be publicly available corrections footage of deaths that happen at any of those institutions? If it wasn't for the lawsuit, maybe no one would have noticed.
There's actually a case that's still pending, and that CT Examiner has filed, and that Ally is taking the lead on.
It's been 10 months since we have filed our request, and we still haven't seen the video, and we've gone through 2 hearings. So it takes a while, but we're hoping that something comes out of it, something good comes out of it.
So for me, when I look at to return to this idea of citizenship, what does it mean to be a citizen? And a part of what it means to be a citizen is to take part, right? And to vote and to elect people. And you can't do that. You can't take part in this civic discourse in these elections if you don't know what's going on. And so part of what the freedom of information is that allows the electorate to be educated. Freedom of information, this is kind of people power, right? And this is the ability for regular people to look and say, this is wrong, or that maybe something about this needs to change. But that just about wraps up the news portion of this program. But any episode of CT Examiner Weekly wouldn't be complete without checking in with our arts editor, Robin Breeding, to find out about the latest events across the region. Robin, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I have to say, I can't believe that the daylilies are out. It's just amazing to me how fast summer is coming in and going. And there's lots of picnics and all kinds of things going on. But one of the first things I have is Our Neighbor Bill. And that's happening at the Ball and Socket Arts Gallery in Cheshire. And it's William Kent, who's a lifelong Durham artist who was sort of a anti-establishment pop artist in the 60s. And he started doing printmaking on slate plates, so carving on plates, and that this exhibition will be his plates.
This is a show of probably work that has never been seen.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really interesting is that his foundation, he's dead now, but his foundation is also trying to create funding for elder artists who, are sort of out of touch with society and need help, and that's a great thing. So selling his art is very purposeful.
So where's this Ball and Socket?
Ball and Socket Arts, and that's in Cheshire, Connecticut, and it's right next door to Fuoco a Pizza, which is a great pizza place if you're up there.
So, and what else do you have for us?
All right. One of the big events every year in our area in Guilford is the Guilford Craft Expo. So it's a huge town green celebration of the arts and lots of crafts and jewelry making and all kinds of things, music, food.
Feels like a throwback to the 60s and 70s. The crafters of all kinds gather together, fill up a huge New England green and with their goods. And it's the big event really of Guilford every year.
Yep. And that's July 17th. And it happens on the town green between 10 and 6 p.m.
And so what else do you have for us, Rob?
There's a really interesting exhibition opening on July 23rd, which will run through January, actually, of 27. And it's at the Yale British Museum, and it's Sightlines, British Landscape Photography, 1840 to now. And it's interesting that the curator has pulled from the collection all kinds of landscape photography, trying to look at how Britain looked at different landscapes through different times about, cultural and political perspectives.
Certainly, I have to say that there's nothing more beautiful than a platinum print of the British landscape, and some of the great photography from the end of the 19th and the early 20th century is something that I'd always go to see. And so when and where?
Yeah, it's July 23rd at Yale Museum of British Art, Yale Center for British Art.
What else do you have for us?
All right. Right here in our own hometown of Old Lyme is coming up the 39th Annual Midsummer Festival. And that's Saturday, July 25th. And they're holding that on the grounds of the Florence Griswold Museum. You can come, and it's actually free to visit the museum on that day. And there's music. You're right there on the Connecticut River. There's music and food and all kinds of art events. It's a big celebration.
So, and do we have something a little bit different for our listeners, though?
For those of you who are football fans, Terry Bradshaw is coming to the Madison Beach Hotel on July 29th, and he is going to have a tasting and a question and answer about his new 12-year-old bourbon that he's just released. Number 12 is his jersey.
Where's this bourbon from?
Allie, where is all bourbon from?
It better be from Kentucky.
That's right.
There still are some old school older drinkers of bourbon, and the time to taste it is when?
It is July 29th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the Madison Beach Hotel.
Well, that about wraps up this week's edition of CT Examiner Weekly. It was great to have you all together in the studio. It's actually one of my favorite things. We're normally far-flung across the state. We get together, we talk about our stories, and next week I hope to have you guys again, because as we say, the news is never done.
For more news and events, or if you want to send in comments or story ideas, please go to ctexaminer.com. And if you want to support our mission of keeping Connecticut informed of the news that matters, a subscription is just $20 for the entire year. Reporting and supporting what matters. This has been CT Examiner Weekly. Thanks for listening.